Thank you for joining us today as we explore how we use sheep's wool for making cloth and clothing. Now that we've learned the process of raising and shearing the sheep, skirting, washing, carding, spinning, and dyeing the wool, we will now discuss what one can do with all of that yarn. If someone is making a blanket or cloth for making clothing, the fabric is often woven. This means that yarn is interlaced between a framework of other yarns to create a sheet of cloth. The machine used to weave yarn into cloth is called a loom. Looms come in many sizes, from very small looms that sit on a table to large looms that sit on the floor, called barn looms. These big looms were used for making blankets and cloth back in the 1700s and early 1800s. In that era, both men and women wove on looms and worked as weavers. Traveling weavers, those who would move from town to town to take on weaving jobs, became well known for their woven coverlets that were used on beds like blankets. As time went on, looms became mechanized or powered by machines. Today, some looms are very large and make huge amounts of cloth in one day. Yet they all work using the same basic parts and methods. The loom we use at the museum to demonstrate weaving is called a tabletop loom. This loom is about 50 years old. Since it is a narrow loom, it makes a narrow piece of fabric. This type of loom is good for making woven scarves, placemats, and other narrow items. To prepare the loom for weaving, the framework of yarns have to be attached to and threaded through the loom in a long process called warping. This can take hours or even days depending on the size of the loom and the width of fabric that you want to make. Once it is set up, there are 3 basic steps to use the loom. First, you need to press the levers on the side of the loom. When you press down, you can see that the top and bottom yarns trade places. Next, you pick up your shuttle, the long piece of wood that holds the weft yarn, the horizontal yarn. After passing the shuttle, in between the 2 sets of yarns, you pull the yarn until there are no loops on the end. Then, you grab the beater and pull it toward you to move the weft yarns closer together. Then, you just start that process over again, pulling the opposite levers, entering with a shuttle on the opposite side from where you just started, and pulling the beater. These steps are repeated over and over again, hundreds or even thousands of times. When the weaving process is done, the piece is carefully removed from the loom by cutting the warp threads. Then the piece can be hemmed or stitched around the edges, or cut into pieces that can be made into a piece of clothing. Here we have a shawl that was made on a loom. It is a triangular piece of loosely woven wool cloth, worn for fashion and warmth. If someone is making an item that needs to be stretchy, like a pair of socks or a sweater, knitting works best. People have knit items for hundreds of years. To knit, one uses 2 long, smooth sticks called knitting needles. One needle is held in each hand. Together, these needles control and connect loops of yarn over and over again to create a piece of knitted cloth. These are some of the ways that people have used yarn to make cloth. There are other ways to use wool too, like felting, crocheting, and embroidery. Be sure to ask your family members, friends, and neighbors if they have ever made any crafts with wool or yarn. You might be surprised to discover that you know an expert knitter or embroiderer. We hope you have enjoyed this journey as we learned about sheep, shearing wool, spinning yarn, and using the yarn for knitting and weaving. Remember all the hard work that went into making clothing back in the 1700s and 1800s. Think about that the next time you cuddle up under a warm blanket or pull on a pair of cozy mittens. From all of us at Brookside Museum, home of the Saratoga County Historical Society, thank you for joining us today.